a harmony of souls. The air in the Grand Symphony Hall was thick with anticipation. A heady perfume of old money, expensive florals, and the collective breath of 1,000 souls waiting to be moved. From her seat in the center of the front row, Dr. Seraphina James felt the familiar thrum of it, a vibration that resonated deep in her bones. But tonight, it was different. It wasn't just the ambient energy of a crowd. It was a current of pure, unadulterated triumph, and she was its epicenter. On stage, bathed in the golden white blaze of the spotlights, her husband, Harrison Vance, took his final bow. His tuxedo was a slash of perfect black against the warm wood of the stage, his blonde hair catching the light like a halo. The applause was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that washed over him, over her, and seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. This was the premiere of his symphony, American Echoes, and it was more than a success. It was a coronation. Seraphine's gloved hands met in a series of sharp, proud claps. A joyous, unrestrained smile bloomed on her face, the kind she usually reserved for private moments. She watched Harrison press a hand to his heart, his handsome face, a perfect mask of humility and overwhelming gratitude. His eyes scanned the adoring crowd, the sea of standing figures, and then, they found her. Across the expanse of flowers and musicians, his gaze locked with hers. He gave a small, almost imperceptible wink, a secret message just for her. We did it. And in that moment, Seraphina felt it so profoundly, it was almost a physical ache. We did. Her heart swelled, because she knew, better than anyone, the journey to this stage. She knew the wilderness of silence he had been lost in before her, and she knew the secret map she had provided to lead him out. Their story hadn't begun in a concert hall, but in the hallowed, dusty silence of a university archive. 5 years prior, she had been Dr. James. Even then, a fiercely brilliant PhD candidate, on the verge of her dissertation. Her passion was a form of academic archaeology, unearthing the lives and works of forgotten black composers. Artists whose genius had been buried by the weight of history and prejudice. Her great discovery, the focus of her life's work, was a man named Lazarus Tate, a composer from the 1920s whose music was so innovative, so heartbreakingly beautiful. It was a crime he wasn't spoken of in the same breath as Gershwin or Copland. All she had were fragments, a few pages of a string quartet, a breathtakingly complex piano soliloquy, a handful of melodic themes jotted on brown, brittle paper. Harrison Vance had wandered into her archive like a man lost. He was already a composer of minor note, known more for his wealthy family name and charismatic presence than for his musical output. He was handsome, charming, and utterly, creatively blocked. He'd confessed as much to her over coffee that first day, his blue eyes clouded with a desperation that she, in her passionate certainty, found compelling. He was mesmerized by her. Not by her beauty, though he complimented it often, but by the fire in her mind. He would sit for hours, listening as she spoke of Lazarus Tate, her voice alive with reverence. She would play Tate's fragmented melodies for him on an old upright piano in the archive's listening room, her fingers breathing life into notes that hadn't been heard in nearly a century. "Listen to that," she'd whisper, her eyes shining. "That harmonic transition there. No one was doing that. It's modern, it's soul-wrenching, it's perfect." He drank her knowledge up. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual passion and blossoming romance. He made her feel seen, cherished, not just as a woman, but as a scholar. They married a year later in a small, elegant ceremony. In their beautiful home, the study became their sanctuary. His grand piano stood on one side, her desk piled high with research on the other. It felt like a perfect collaboration, a symphony of two minds, driven by a loyalty so deep it was second nature. Seraphina gave him everything. She laid out the treasure of her research before him, not as a guarded academic, but as a loving, devoted wife. She wanted to be his muse, to pour the genius of the past into him so he could create the music of the future. "Let Lazarus speak through you, Harry," she'd urged him, her hand on his as he sat before the keys. "Let his soul echo in your work." And now, at the post-premiere gala, The world believed he had Sepp's champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells. Critics, their faces flushed with excitement, clapped Harrison on the back, speaking in reverent tones. "A work of staggering genius, Mr. Vance," one exclaimed. "Truly, the great American symphony we've been waiting for." Harrison, with Sepp on his arm, navigated the glittering crowd with practiced ease. He was born for this, for the adoration, for the spotlight. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Hear that, darling? They love it. They love us." He squeezed her hand and raised his glass to the room. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice ringing with confidence. The chatter subsided. "To the music, of course, but most importantly, to my beautiful wife, my muse, Dr. Seraphina James. Without her wisdom, her passion, and her unwavering belief in me, none of this would have been possible." The crowd applauded again, their warm gazes turning to her. Felt a blush creep up her neck. She looked at her husband, this man whose career she had helped build from the ashes of his own set-out, and felt a wave of love and pride so powerful it left her breathless. He was her husband, her partner, her collaborator. The symphony was his, but the soul of it, the echo of Lazarus Tate that she had so carefully preserved, was her gift to him. And tonight, the entire world was celebrating that gift. She had no reason to believe it was anything other than a harmony of two souls. Perfectly in tune, the dissonant chordates following the premiere were a dizzying blur of praise. The name Harrison Vance was on the lips of everyone in the classical music world. Interviews, magazine profiles, and offers from orchestras around the globe poured in. Seraphina lived in a state of vicarious joy, clipping articles and managing the flood of congratulatory calls. She had wanted this for him, and her happiness was intrinsically tied to his. It was a week later, while archiving the press clippings in a handsome leather-bound scrapbook, that she found the first unsettling note. It was a review from a notoriously discerning critic at the New York Ledger, a man named Marcus Thorne, known for his encyclopedic knowledge and his refusal to be swept up in hype. Most of the review was effusive, praising the symphony's emotional power and grand scope. But one paragraph snagged in Seraphine's mind. While Vance's orchestration is undeniably brilliant, Thorne wrote, one cannot help but be struck by a hauntingly familiar, almost ancestral quality to the symphony's central themes. The primary cello line in the second movement, and the devastatingly complex piano motif in the fourth, feel less like modern compositions and more like perfectly preserved artifacts from a bygone era. It is as if Mr. Vance has channeled the anonymous, forgotten soul of early American music and given it a voice for the 21st century. Anonymous, forgotten soul. The phrase echoed in the quiet of the study. It was almost a direct quote of the words she had used, countless times, to describe Lazarus Tate to Harrison. She reread the paragraph. Thorne hadn't meant it as an accusation. He'd meant it as a compliment to Harrison's perceived depth. But to Seraphina, it felt like a spotlight swinging dangerously close to a secret she hadn't even known existed. That evening, she brought it up with Harrison. She kept her tone light, casual, as she handed him a glass of wine. "Did you see the Thorne review?" He noticed the ancestral quality. "It's funny, that's what I always said about Tate's work." Harrison, who was reading an offer from the Berlin Philharmonic, didn't look up. "Thorne's a pedant. He has to find some obscure angle to prove how clever he is." Still, Seraphina pressed gently, "It's an incredible insight. It means he really heard the influences." Harrison finally lowered the letter, and his eyes, when they met hers, were strangely cold. "Darling, all art is built on what came before, its homage, its inspiration. You of all people should know that. Are you suggesting there's something improper about it?" His tone was sharp, a surgeon's scalpel where a painter's brush should have been. He was using her own academic principles as a shield, and the implication was clear. By questioning him, she was questioning her own intelligence. Seraphina felt a flush of embarrassment. "No, of course not. I just thought it was interesting." "Well, it's not," he said, his voice softening as he saw her expression. He stood and wrapped his arms around her. The only thing that matters is that we created something beautiful. Don't let these over-intellectual critics put strange ideas in your head. He kissed her forehead, but the gesture felt like a dismissal. A final word on a conversation he refused to have. But the idea was already there, a single dissonant chord in a previously perfect symphony. That night, she couldn't sleep. The silence of their large house felt heavy, oppressive. At 2 a.m., she slipped out of bed and went down to the state-of-the-art listening room Harrison had installed. She put on a pair of professional-grade studio headphones, the kind that block out the world and reveal every nuance of a recording. She queued up American Echoes. This time, she wasn't listening as a proud wife. She was listening as Dr. Seraphina James, the world's foremost expert on the music of Lazarus Tate. She filtered out the emotion, the memory of the premiere, the love for her husband. She listened. With a cold, analytical ear, the first movement was masterful, but derivative in a general way, full of grand, sweeping Americana. But then, the second movement began. The cello solo. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just influenced by Lazarus Tate's fragment in C minor. It was fragment in C minor, with a few notes altered. A different instrument taking the lead, but the soul of it the unique, mournful progression. The unusual spacing of the notes was identical. Her blood ran cold. She skipped to the fourth movement, her hand trembling as she clicked the mouse. The piano motif, the one the critic had mentioned. It was a direct lift from Tate's most complex surviving work, Soliloquy for a Broken World. A piece so intricate, she hadn't even fully deciphered it herself. Harrison couldn't have composed that. He simply didn't have the theoretical depth. Wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't homage. It wasn't inspiration. It was theft. The symphony played on, but all she could hear was the screech of betrayal. Her mind raced, replaying years of conversations, of shared work, of her own passionate lectures on Tate's genius. She had handed him the soul of a forgotten man, and he had claimed it as his own. A few days later, the second, more personal betrayal made itself known. Harrison was at a luncheon with the symphony board. Seraphina was gathering his coat for the dry cleaners when her fingers brushed against a stiff piece of cardstock in his pocket. It was a receipt from a hotel bar, the Gilded Lily, dated the week before the premiere. The timestamp was 11:47 p.m., on a night Harrison had claimed to be at the studio. Wrestling with the final orchestration, a cold, ugly suspicion bloomed in her gut. With a few clicks on her laptop, she navigated to Instagram. She searched the location tag for the Gilded Lily, and scrolled back to the date on the receipt. Her heart stopped. There it was. A photo posted by a friend of the orchestra's lead violinist, Chloe Sterling. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, was Harrison. He was leaning in close to Chloe, his hand on her back, a wide, intimate smile on his face. Chloe, a woman 10 years younger than Seraphina, with the same blonde hair as Harrison, was looking up at him with undisguised adoration. Seraphina stared at the screen, her vision blurring. The two betrayals, one of the mind, one of the heart, fused into a single, monstrous entity. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had cheated with her. He had used her intellect, her passion, her life's work, to create a fraudulent masterpiece. And while he was doing it, he was finding comfort in the arms of another woman. She closed the laptop. The triumphant, soaring music of American Echoes seemed to echo in the silent house. Each note a calculated lie. Each crescendo a monument to his deceit. The harmony was shattered. All that was left was a roaring, deafening silence. The manuscript of lies. For 2 days, Seraphina moved through her life like a ghost haunting the scenes of her former happiness. She made coffee, answered emails, and smiled blandly at Harrison, all while a storm of grief and rage churned within her. The betrayal was so colossal, so profound, that she didn't know where to begin to process it. She felt utterly alone, trapped in a beautiful house with the man who had systematically dismantled her world. On the third day, she knew she couldn't bear the silence any longer. She called her best friend, Dr. Anya Sharma, a sharp nonsense history professor she'd known since graduate school. They met at a small out-of-the-way cafe, a place Harrison would never think to go. As soon as Anya saw her face, her own warm smile faded. "Seraphina, what is it? You look like you haven't slept in a week." With trembling hands, Seraphina laid it all out. The critic's review. The dissonant chords that were too familiar. The late-night listening session. And finally, the photo of Harrison and Chloe Sterling, the hotel receipt. She spoke, in a low, flat voice, the voice of someone in shock. Anya listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief, and finally to a cold, simmering anger on her friend's behalf. When Seraphina finished, Anya reached across the table and placed her hand over Seraphine's. "The man is a monster," Anya said, her voice devoid of its usual humor. "A parasite with good hair." She paused, her practical nature taking over. "But, Sera, you have to be careful. Incredibly careful. Harrison's family has lawyers on top of their lawyers. He'll deny everything. He'll say you're a jealous wife, that you're unstable. He will try to destroy your reputation before you can even touch his." "I know," Seraphina whispered. "That's why an accusation isn't enough. I need proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof." "Then you have to get it," Anya said, her eyes hardening with resolve. "Find the receipts. Find the evidence. And then you burn him to the ground." Anya's words were a clarion call. The grief, while still present, began to recede, replaced by something colder, sharper, purpose. That afternoon, she waited for the telltale sound of Harrison's luxury sedan pulling out of the driveway. He was off to a celebratory lunch with the conductor. A lunch she now knew was likely a cover for a tryst with Chloe. The moment he was gone, she walked directly to his private study. The room, once her favorite in the house, now felt alien, hostile. The grand piano stood like a silent, black monument to his lies. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. He had always been possessive of this space, insisting it was his sacred sanctuary where his genius needed absolute privacy. She now understood that what he was protecting wasn't genius, but a crime. She started with his desk, sifting through neatly organized papers that were all for show. Contracts, press releases, fan mail, nothing. She checked the drawers, empty. Files, expensive stationery, nothing of substance. Her frustration grew. He was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He would have hidden it. Her eyes fell upon a large antique wooden chest in the corner of the room. A piece he used as a stand for a globe. He kept it locked, claiming it held old family documents. He'd made a small joke of it, calling it his treasure chest. With a sudden chilling certainty, Seraphina knew the evidence was in there. The key was the problem. She searched his desk again, her fingers flying, but found nothing. Then she remembered something: a spare key to the wine cellar he kept taped to the underside of the globe's stand, in case of emergencies. Her breath hitched. On a hunch, she knelt down, her hands fumbling beneath the heavy stand. Her fingers met the cool, smooth surface of a small brass key held by a piece of yellowing tape. It wasn't for the wine cellar. With trembling hands, she inserted the key into the lock on the chest. It turned with a heavy, grating click. She lifted the heavy lid. The contents stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't old family documents. It was a meticulously organized archive of his fraud. There were dozens of files. The first one she opened contained high-resolution photocopies of Lazarus Tate's manuscripts. Her photocopies, the ones from her dissertation research, in the margins. In Harrison's elegant script were his notes. Reorchestrate for full strings here too thin for a modern audience. Invert this theme for the viola. Less distinct. Add a percussive build-up. Needs more drama. Titled this section, The Prairie Awakens. It was a blueprint of his theft. He hadn't just copied the music, he had dissected it. Like a specimen, making calculated alterations to disguise its origins while retaining its soul. He was a butcher, not a composer. She dug deeper. She found another folder, this one filled with legal documents. He had systematically copyrighted every single stolen melody, every progression, every last note of American Echoes in his name alone. Months before he'd even shown her the finished score, there were drafts of his future program notes, already, describing his arduous creative process. The final file was the one that broke her. It was a single sheet of paper, a list of names. At the top was Lazarus Tate. Below him were 4 other names, all obscure black and Creole composers from her research. Beside each name was a checkmark. He hadn't just stolen from Tate for this symphony. He had a list of future victims. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. This was his business model. A single, cold tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. In that moment, watching it fall onto the evidence of his breathtaking deceit, the last vestiges of the woman who had loved Harrison Vance died. A new woman was born from the ashes, one forged in betrayal and fueled by a righteous, icy rage. She closed the chest, locked it, and replaced the key. A simple accusation was an insult to the scale of this crime. A quiet divorce was a mercy he did not deserve. He hadn't just stolen music, he had stolen history. He had tried to erase a black man's legacy and build his own upon its grave. Her revenge, she decided, would have to be historic. It would have to be public. It would have to be an execution. Her mind flashed to an email she'd seen in the university's weekly newsletter. The Ethelred Conservatory, the most prestigious music school in the country, was hosting an evening with Harrison Vance in 3 weeks. He was the guest of honor, scheduled to give a lecture on his masterpiece. It was to be hosted by the dean himself, Alistair Finch, a man Seraphina knew by reputation a staunch traditionalist who valued academic integrity above all else. A plan began to form, not born of emotion, but of cold, calculating logic. It was a terrible, brilliant, and exquisitely appropriate idea. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the study. The hurt was still there, deep in her eyes, but it was now surrounded by a diamond-hard resolve. Harrison had written his symphony of lies. Now, she would compose her concerto of revenge. Composing The Reckoning, the next 3 weeks were a masterclass in duality. To the outside world, and to Harrison, Seraphina was the picture of the supportive, if slightly withdrawn, wife. She was quieter, more thoughtful, which Harrison, in his staggering arrogance, interpreted as awe of his newfound fame. In reality, her mind was a whirlwind of meticulous planning, a silent, furious engine of retribution. Her first move was to craft an email to Dean Alistair Finch of the Ethelred Conservatory. She spent an entire morning on it, choosing every word with the precision of a poet and the cunning of a general. Dear Dean Finch, I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to you today, not only as Harrison Vance's wife, but as a scholar. In my own right, I was so thrilled to learn that the conservatory is honoring my husband with an evening with Harrison Vance. It is a richly deserved accolade. I would like to propose something, if I may be so bold. As a surprise for Harrison, I would love to give a brief, 10-minute introductory tribute before his lecture. As a music historian, I have been deeply fascinated by the historical antecedents and traditions that have so clearly influenced his masterpiece, American Echoes. I believe a short academic analysis of these influences would provide the perfect context for the audience, enriching their understanding of his creative genius. It would be a tribute from a wife, but also from one scholar to another. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Dr. Seraphina James. She hit send and felt a thrill of cold power. She had baited the hook with everything a man like Finch would respect: deference, scholarship, and the novelty of a wife scholar honoring her husband. The reply came less than an hour later. The dean was utterly delighted by her thoughtful and intellectually rigorous proposal. He graciously extended her time to 20 minutes, placing her on the official program right before Harrison's keynote. The stage was set. Her next call was to Anya. I need your help, she said, her voice low and urgent. I need access to the university's higher resolution archival scanners. Off the books, That weekend, they met in the deserted history department. For 10 straight hours, they worked under the low hum of the machines. They scanned every fragment of Lazarus Tate's manuscripts, every faded staff line, every scribbled note, digitizing the fragile paper into crystal-clear image files. They handled the documents with reverent care. 2 women silently working to restore a history that one man had tried to steal. The following week was spent in the video editing suite in the university basement. Seraphina, who had learned the software for her online lectures, now repurposed her skills for vengeance. It was painstaking work. She synced audio clips from the official recording of American Echoes with the newly digitized images of Tate's manuscripts. She created a stunning side-by-side comparison. On the left, a clip of the Philharmonic Orchestra in full flight. On the right, Tate's original, handwritten notes. A highlighter tool, elegantly tracing the stolen melody in perfect time with the music. It was a visual indictment. A digital smoking gun. At home, her performance was flawless. She played the part of the doting wife with a chilling perfection. One evening, as Harrison was dressing for yet another celebratory dinner, she put on the Symphony, letting it fill the house. "That cello line in the second movement," she said, her voice soft and admiring. "It's just divine, Harry. Tell me again how it came to you. Did it come all at once, or did you have to fight for it?" Harrison, busy with his cufflinks. "Ah, that one. A gift from the ether, my love. It just flowed out of me. Woke up one morning, and there it was, fully formed." Seraphina smiled, a slow, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Incredible, a true miracle. He was so consumed by his own myth that he didn't notice the unnerving glint in her gaze. He didn't question why she was suddenly so fascinated with the minutiae of his process. He simply saw what he wanted to see. Adoration, the final piece of her plan, was the audience. She knew the critics and patrons would be there, but she needed one person in particular. She bought a single, anonymous ticket online and had it messengered to the office of Marcus Thorne, the New York Ledger critic. There was no note, just the ticket. She knew his curiosity, the professional itch caused by his own review, would be too strong to ignore. He would be her star witness. The night before the event arrived, the air in their home was thick with anticipation, but for entirely different reasons. Harrison was in his study, striding back and forth as he practiced his speech, his voice booming. With self-importance, he was on top of the world, ready to receive his crown. Seraphina was in her own office, the door locked. The final presentation was loaded onto a thumb drive that hung on a silver chain around her neck, resting against her skin like a cold promise. She stared at her reflection in the dark computer screen. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized. The soft academic warmth was gone, replaced by the sharp, clear lines of a warrior. Her heart wasn't pounding with fear or anxiety. It was beating with a slow, steady, and determined rhythm, like a drum before a battle. The trap was set. All that was left was for the guest of honor to walk into it. The concerto. The concerto, the main auditorium of the Ethelred Conservatory, was a temple dedicated to music. Tiers of red velvet seats rose towards a ceiling adorned with a magnificent crystal chandelier. The air was warm, filled with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the scent of old wood, and the electric hum of importance. Every major figure in the city's cultural landscape was there. Critics with their notepads, wealthy patrons in their jewels, aspiring students with stars in their eyes. At the back, a small camera crew was preparing to live stream the event, ready to broadcast Harrison Vance's triumph to the world. On stage, Harrison was not merely seated, he was enthroned. The organizers had placed him in a large, throne-like wingback chair at the center of the stage, a king holding court. He looked out at the adoring faces, a magnanimous, charming smile playing on his lips. He was soaking it in, drinking the adoration like fine wine. Dean Alistair Finch, a tall, imposing man with a mane of silver hair, stepped up to the podium. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the hall. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are here tonight to celebrate a singular talent. A composer who has, with his masterpiece, American Echoes, captured the very soul of our nation's music. It is my profound honor to welcome the man of the hour, Mr. Harrison Vance. The hall erupted. In thunderous applause, Harrison rose, gave a slight bow, and gestured for them to sit, a gesture of both command and feigned humility. Before Mr. Vance shares his insights with us, the Dean continued, we have a very special introduction. It is a unique privilege to hear a work of art analyzed by a brilliant scholar who also happens to have had a front row seat to its creation. Please welcome the esteemed music historian and Mr. Vance's biggest supporter, Dr. Seraphina James. Another wave of warm, polite applause. Seraphina emerged from the wings. She was a vision of quiet power. She wore a simple, sleeveless black dress that fell to the floor, her only adornment the silver chain around her neck. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her face composed, her gait steady. She looked every bit the respected academic. Harrison beamed at her, pride swelling in his chest, and gave her another one of his secret winks. This was perfect. His brilliant, beautiful wife, singing his praises on the most important night of his life. Seraphina reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. Her eyes briefly met those of Marcus Thorne in the third row. He gave a slight, curious nod. She began to speak, her voice calm, clear, and carrying to every corner of the hall. Good evening, she said. Dean Finch, esteemed guests, we are here tonight to celebrate genius. But what is genius? Is it a lightning strike of inspiration, or is it a conversation? A dialogue between the present and the past? Harrison leaned forward in his chair, a pleased smile on his face. This was even better than he'd imagined. A deep intellectual tribute. Every great artist stands on the shoulders of those who came before, Seraphina continued, her voice smooth. As silk, every masterpiece has its ghosts, an echo of an unsung voice, a forgotten soul. In American Echoes, my husband has created a work so profound because it channels those ghosts so perfectly. Tonight, before he speaks about his creation, I want to give one of those ghosts a name. As she spoke that last sentence, she discreetly pressed a button on the remote in her hand. The giant screen behind Harrison flickered to life. But it was not his handsome, smiling face that appeared. It was a stark, black-and-white photograph from the 1920s. A dignified, serious-looking black man holding a violin, his eyes filled with a deep, soulful intelligence. Beneath the photo, in large, elegant letters, were two words, Lazarus, Tate, A. Confused murmur rippled through the audience. Harrison's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He glanced at Seraphina, but she was not looking at him. Her eyes were on the screen. Lazarus Tate, she announced, her voice gaining a new hard edge. A name none of you have likely ever heard. But you have all heard his music. She clicked the remote again. The left side of the screen filled with a video of the premiere performance. The cellist playing the beautiful, mournful opening of the second movement. The music swelled, filling the hall. Harrison's face relaxed slightly. A tribute to my influences, he thought. Clever. But then, the right side of the screen came alive. An image of Tate's original, handwritten manuscript appeared. A glowing yellow line began to trace the notes on the fragile paper, moving in perfect, damning synchronization with the music being played. The melody was not similar. It was identical. The audience gasped. Harrison shot bolt upright in his chair, his face draining of all color. This wasn't a tribute. This was an accusation. Seraphina was relentless. For the next 20 minutes, she conducted a live public execution. Calmly, methodically, and with chilling academic precision, she dissected American Echoes, piece by stolen piece. Let us examine the primary theme, she would say, her voice never rising. A clip would play, hailed by the Times as a work of sublime originality. Now, let us examine Lazarus Tate's piano soliloquy, written in 1928. The manuscript would appear, the notes aligning perfectly. She deconstructed his entire symphony, the soaring string section from the first movement, the complex percussive rhythms from the third, the grand, triumphant finale. Each one was laid bare, revealed as the work of Lazarus Tate. With every click of the remote, she peeled back another layer of his lie, exposing the rotten core beneath. The atmosphere in the hall had transformed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a tomb-like, horrified silence, punctuated only by gasps of outrage. Dean Finch's face was a mask of thunderous fury. Marcus Thorne was leaning forward, his notepad forgotten, his eyes wide with vindication. In the audience, Chloe Sterling, seated with the other orchestra members, had gone white as a sheet, staring at Harrison with dawning horror, and Harrison was imploding. His face had collapsed, moving through stages of disbelief, terror, and finally, impotent rage. He looked from the screen to Seraphina, his mouth opening and closing silently, a fish drowning in air. He was trapped, impaled by the spotlight, crucified by his own wife, on the stage of his greatest triumph. For her final exhibit, Seraphina played the most celebrated passage of the symphony, the breathtaking piano motif from the fourth movement. That had been universally hailed as the mark of Harrison's singular genius. She let the beautiful, complex notes hang in the silent air for a long moment. That, she said, her voice ringing with clarity, was the last complete piece Lazarus Tate ever wrote before his death. He called it Soliloquy for a Broken World. She turned from the podium and took 2 steps toward her husband. For the first time, she looked directly at him, her gaze as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. True genius, she announced, her voice resonating with power, honors the silenced. It does not put its name on their tombstones and call it a legacy. The only thing my husband created was the lie. The music, she paused, letting the weight of her final words settle on the stunned crowd. The music belongs to Mr. Lazarus Tate. She set the microphone down on the podium with a soft, final click. A profound, deafening silence held the entire auditorium captive. It stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. Then, a single sound broke the stillness. In the third row, Marcus Thorne slowly, deliberately, began to clap. Another person followed, then another. Within moments, the entire hall erupted. A thunderous, roaring standing ovation that shook the room. A wave of sound, not for the fraud on the stage, but for the avenging angel who had just walked off it, and for the ghost she had finally, gloriously, brought into the light. Chapter 6. A New Harmony. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. The standing ovation for Seraphina left Harrison stranded on stage in a hurricane of silence and judgment. As the house lights came up, the dam of decorum broke. Flashbulbs strobed, turning his horrified face into a series of grotesque, frozen masks. Reporters who had come to document a celebration swarmed the stage, shouting questions like accusations. "Mr. Vance, is it true? Did you steal the symphony? Harrison, give us a comment." He was paralyzed, a statue of a great man crumbling from the inside out. Dean Finch, his face a granite mask of disgust, strode to the podium. His voice boomed. Over the chaos, the Ethelred Conservatory unequivocally condemns academic and artistic fraud. Mr. Vance's honors are hereby rescinded, and a formal inquiry will be launched immediately. It was a swift, public decapitation. The story didn't just break, it detonated. By morning, the Vance deception was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News headlines screamed the story. Music's greatest hoax. Composer's career built on stolen legacy. Wife exposes husband in dramatic public reckoning. His carefully constructed world was annihilated in a single night. His record label dropped. Pim. Orchestras cancelled his performances, and the high society that had celebrated him now shunned him completely. Chloe Sterling, implicated by association and her own ambition, vanished from the music scene. Her career as a lead violinist over before it had truly begun. Weeks later, the dust had begun to settle, revealing a new landscape. Seraphina sat in her university office. The room, once a quiet refuge, was now a command center. The desk was overflowing with bouquets of flowers from strangers and fellow academics. The phone rang incessantly with calls from publishers wanting her story, museums wanting to exhibit Tate's manuscripts, and film studios wanting to buy the rights. She had filed for divorce the day after the event. Harrison, broken and facing a barrage of lawsuits for fraud, didn't contest it. Through her lawyer, Seraphina made one simple demand: that all past and future royalties from American Echoes be redirected. Not to her, but to a new foundation. Working with a deeply apologetic, and now deeply admiring Dean Finch, she established the Lazarus Tate Foundation for Underserved Musicians. Its mission was to fund scholarships and commission new works from artists of color, ensuring that other brilliant voices would not be silenced by history. The Symphony of Lies was now funding a future of truth. One crisp autumn afternoon, she met Anya at their favorite cafe. Anya looked at her friend, truly looked at her, for the first time since the storm had passed. The haunted, brittle look was gone. In its place was a serene, unshakable calm. "I have to ask," Anya said gently, "was it worth it? The pain, the spectacle?" Seraphina took a sip of her tea, her gaze distant and thoughtful. "My heart was broken, Anya. He betrayed me in the most intimate ways possible, as a wife and as a scholar, and yes, part of me wanted to see him fall, but the revenge, it became about something bigger. It was never just about a cheating husband. It was about a stolen history. He tried to commit a murder of the soul, to erase a man from existence, and wear his skin as a costume. I couldn't let that stand." She looked at Anya, her eyes clear and certain. "I didn't just avenge my heart. I resurrected a ghost." The story concludes 6 months later. Seraphina is not in a university archive or a lawyer's office. She is at Carnegie Hall. It is the official, and first ever, world premiere of the complete works of Lazarus Tate. The hall is sold out. On the podium is a brilliant young black conductor, a rising star. The first recipient of a grant from the Tate Foundation, Seraphina, is not in the front row, dressed as a wife and muse. She is seated in a place of honor in the patron's box. Guest of the orchestra. She is simply Dr. James, the historian who corrected the record. The conductor raises his baton, and the first notes of Tate's music, pure, untainted, and glorious, fill the legendary hall. It is the familiar melody from the second movement of what the world once called American Echoes. But hearing it now, under its rightful name, feels completely different. It is not a sound of deceit, but of glorious, long overdue triumph. Seraphina leans back in her velvet seat. She doesn't watch the orchestra. She closes her eyes, and for the first time in years, she simply listens. She has lost a husband, a home, a life she thought she knew, but in their place, she has found something infinitely more valuable: her own purpose, her own strength, and a justice that rings truer than any symphony. The music washes over her, a perfect, beautiful harmony, finally restored.